captive of the Dogman clan. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story to tell you that I call my life story, and my mother calls my sob story. It's the true account of how I was abducted by aquatic canine cryptids in northern Michigan, held against my will for over 3 months, forced to eat that which the Dogman found too gross. It started off as a swim in a lake, a pond, but it ended up with me losing absolutely everything. When this all began, I was a young man who had just finished 4 years at an Ivy League school, but was still a few credits shy of graduation. I was at a crossroads and uncertain what to do. I told my mother I wanted to take a few months off to do something besides school in order to decide on my life's direction. I think that was just what she was waiting to hear from me, as it had become unfashionable among her peers to even have sons anyway. Whatever I said or did was viewed through a lens of male entitled chauvinism or whatever made-up nonsense. I was her son, the same person she had known since I came out of her, but I wasn't fashionable any longer, so my sister became the only important person in my mother's immediate family. I lost my temper and said something to her about how my life would be easier living off the grid in the forest. At least in the deep woods, nobody lectures you about third-wave feminism or whatever. I dodged a lamp flying at my head as I exited and walked straight into the woods on the back of my mother's estate. I had put my bathing suit on under my clothes because I had originally intended to visit my buddy at his backyard pool that morning. I needed to blow off steam in that moment, though, so I stormed directly through the trees to the swimming hole back there. My mother told me to call it a pond. She said swimming hole is a term that only hillbillies would use. I don't even know what a hillbilly is, but maybe I am one, because I call it a swimming hole too. This pond was really a small lake, and it was a very deep one that I had never actually found the bottom of. I used to try to a few years earlier. I got a snorkel mask, and I started trying to swim all the way down, touch the bottom, and then come up. When I finally learned how to hold my breath long enough to do this, I discovered that what I thought was the bottom was just a very wet mud that shifted around in my hands when I would try to touch it. No matter how far I reached down, I could still reach further. Eventually I gave up trying to find the bottom of that swimming hole at all. For all I know, it comes out on the other side of the planet. Anyway, I didn't explore the bottom that day. I just took my outer clothes off and left them with my cell phone on shore. Then I jumped into the water, wearing my bathing suit. It was a hot day and it felt good to swim around in there. Soon I started to calm down and accept things. And it's true, in the old days, I'd have been getting all the inheritance and I'd have been obliged to care for my sister. Now she would get all the money while publicly bad-mouthing and sabotaging me for personal characteristics that I have no say in, like my gender and so forth. It's just the way of the world. Was it better to play it my mother's way in exchange for a tiny inheritance? Or should I just strike out in the world on my own and try to find people who don't hate me for what I look like or other things I have no control over? And as I was wrapped up deeply in serious thought, something grabbed my ankle, pulling me down into the water and making everything I had been thinking about quite irrelevant. I did struggle, but I had also breathed in some water when I had been pulled down, and I was in a bad way almost immediately. I don't remember passing out, but I remember waking up, coughing violently, and I remember the horrible feeling of water pouring out of my lungs. I was on some flat, rocky surface in a cooler, darker inside location. When I could finally pay attention to my surroundings, I saw that I was in a cavernous interior, with water coming up in the center of the room to the level of the ground. As I looked, I saw that I was surrounded by canines of a strange sort. Large dogs that looked sort of like wolves, but sort of not like them. I looked around for the masters of the canines, but all I saw were more canines. They couldn't be who dragged me into this place. I had been grabbed by what felt like a hand. Everyone knows that canines have paws, not hands, so I needed to find a human. And then I felt I would know what was going on. I stood up and started to walk in a random direction, exploring where I was. One of the canines shocked me to the core by getting up just as I had, on his hind legs, standing much taller than I do, and he moved to stand in front of me and block my passage. I had not really registered the canines as a threat in my somewhat traumatized state. I always liked dogs, even big ones. These didn't seem friendly though. Some more of them stood up and gathered around the one blocking me. They all looked at me with impatience and intolerance in their eyes. I backed away, and there was no conflict, but I found there were very few places I could go without getting glared at. At times there were almost 24 of these creatures in there, although some kept coming and going through the watery opening in the center of the floor, so that number kept changing. I was wondering when the owner of these weird upright standing dogs was gonna come collect his pack and explain to me what was going on. But then, at some point, the biggest of the dogmen came over to me and sorta pulled me up into a standing position roughly, using his hands. Wait, using his what? Once he got me standing, he shoved me, and then a few of us began marching through a very dark tunnel where there was no light at all. I'm afraid of the dark and I started to panic. I tried to get back out of there. Now several of them were shoving me. I kept moving forward into the pitch darkness, wanting to scream. Push, push, shove. I moved forward, not being able to see one single thing in front of me. I felt certain they were pushing me into a pit, and that I wouldn't know until I was falling into it, and it was too late to save myself. I felt like my brain was gonna explode. I don't think I ever felt that completely freaked out. The last thing I wanted to do was take another step forward into that pitch blackness, but that's what those creepy, smelly dog-like men were forcing me to do. This was the worst moment of my life, but it was gonna get a whole lot worse, trust me. So obviously they did not throw me into a pit and end my life, since I'm here writing this down for you to read. We followed that dark tunnel into a larger cavern that was dimly lit from places above me that I couldn't really make out. In this central place, which was somewhat circular part of the way around, there were caves extending deeper into the walls, and it seemed these dog people had each claimed their own sort of doghouse spot. It was sort of like a cave people village, you might say. I was brought through an area with younger dogmen, and my arrival caused a tumult. It seemed that most of the smaller dog people liked me, as they licked me all over and made happy sounds as I was brought through. I can't really explain the process, but it seemed to have been decided that I was going to be placed in a smaller cave next to a space being lived in by one of the young ones who seemed to like me and his family. The way they were treating me, I sort of felt as though I must have been chosen as the family's new pet. When I got thrown into the space next to the family's apparent home, I was stunned to find a human female in there, wearing nothing but denim cutoffs, and she was tied to a boulder with rags. I tried to speak to her, but the poor thing screamed bloody murder, till they eventually took me out of there and tied me with what looked like a remnant of a human-made rope to a boulder in a different recess. I couldn't understand anything the human was saying, if she was saying anything at all. Not only was I not sure if she spoke English, I wasn't sure if she spoke any language. That pack eats meat, provided to the females, the elderly, and the young ones by a group of the younger and middle-aged bull dogmen. Men ate first, females second, kids third, and I got what the kids rejected. At first, it was too nauseating, and I fasted. Then, when I got hungry enough, I ate what they gave me, but I found I couldn't keep it down. Eventually, I started to have less of a problem with that end of it. You really can adapt to anything when survival depends on it. The alpha male dogmen would come and go as they pleased. The adult females would go on errands in the outside when necessary. But the children, the elderly dogmen, and the pet humans were kept in the cave system most of the time. So it was, I think, the third week in August when this all started, and it was warm enough down there in those caverns that I was not really uncomfortable at first. My feet were developing calluses that rivaled horseshoes in terms of hardness, but I was losing weight and I was feeling fit enough. I was beginning to learn not to panic, and it was becoming a bit of an exercise in Zen and remaining conscious in the moment. I was almost getting used to my new life. And then, after 7 or 8 days, I realized I was on the verge of forgetting to count how long I had been with them. The idea of losing touch with the human calendar terrified me, as it meant then I would be completely cut off from all human culture. I started to scratch the days in a place on my cell wall, but the next night, we were all gathered together by the alpha bulls, and we were herded through another, somewhat wider, but just as pitch black tunnel out onto the surface world, which looks so much differently now than I had remembered it. My personal handmade wall calendar was back there somewhere, and I had no idea where I was heading to next. Wherever we were, the stars were incredibly bright and easy to make out. I was really mad at myself for never studying astronomy, even in a cursory manner. I mean, can a ship's navigator tell exactly where he is just by looking at the stars? I wanted so badly to know where the heck we were walking from and to, but I have no idea. From that point forward, I also really had no guess about how many days I was in captivity. We stayed in underground locations sometimes where I couldn't tell where the illumination was coming from. The lighting in places like that would remain the same, dim, like sunrise or sunset, all day and all night. I had no sense of time in those cave systems, or whatever they were. You know, that's another thing. This guy I know was asking me recently if these were natural caves and tunnels, or if they were hand-carved, and I had to tell him that I wouldn't really know what to look for in either case. I do not remember seeing these creatures using tools. They seemed to hunt using their hands, teeth, and feet. I never saw them carving out a tunnel, so I can't tell you if that's something that they could even do. Thinking back on it, I do suppose it's rather convenient how the relatively similar living spaces were there in each succeeding location that we would go to temporarily inhabit. Is nature the world's greatest landlord? Had the Dogman created small settlements in multiple locations so that they could migrate back and forth? Or had they inherited these caverns from some earlier and now defunct people, most likely one that used tools? I say now defunct because if the Native Americans of this area knew these remarkable underground living spaces, I'm pretty certain they'd shut out the Dogmen and send in crews to investigate and study. And then we really could answer that question about who or what created these several locations. At some point, the cave system we were staying in started to get really cold. With what looked like old rags they seemed to have found, I was always on the lookout for cloth or animal skins, or anything I could use as a blanket, or clothing. I knew I would not be able to make it through a winter in my bathing suit, but I didn't see how I could explain that to a Dogman. About all I could do would be to pass away, and these wolf people would probably just think something like, Humans only seem to live one season in captivity. Then they'd have the alphas catch a new one in the spring. I felt doomed, and things only got worse. The males got us together, and I assumed they were marching us south. I was hoping for Miami, personally, maybe St. Pete. Instead, we got an unidentifiable wintry forest wilderness. That's what we came out into. That weird woman and I were going to be forced to march in our bare feet in the snow. I had a feeling that was not going to work out. The girl was the first to go, and the dogmen gathered around to stare at her prone form as she turned blue. I ran away like an insane man. I ran until I couldn't feel my feet, and then I still kept running, trying to pretend that it didn't matter to me, that everything below my knees had gone numb. I don't think the dogmen even followed me. I wonder how long it was before they noticed me gone. I also wonder who rescued me and brought me to the hospital, because I have no memory of that. Well, I had gotten frostbite, but they got to me in time to save every finger and toe, so I'm quite a lucky person. The pond I was abducted from is in Oscoda County, Michigan, and the woods I was rescued out of are just to the east of Hollidaysburg in PA. That's over 500 miles away according to Google Maps. It says we could have done it in 7 or 8 days if we had gone straight through, but of course we stayed in multiple locations along the way. Since it was mid-December when I woke up in the hospital, that means I was out of the loop for around 3.5 months. That's a long time to wear nothing but a bathing suit, trust me. When I opened my eyes one day in the hospital, and I saw my mother, you can imagine how happy I was. I tried to get up, but she shouted at me that I was gonna pull the thing out of the whatever and I should sit still for once in my life. I realized she had a captive audience now. She had shown up not out of concern, not to help me get better, no. She had shown up to perform. And it was quite a show she put on, too. It didn't matter what I told her. She knew in advance that I was a liar. There was no such thing as a dogman, and if there were, it wouldn't live in her pond. I didn't walk 500 miles with a pack of dogmen. I was goofing around all that time. I was probably on drugs, and I was so stupid I forgot to put my winter clothes on, and then I ended up in the hospital. Hadn't she told me since I was a kid that this would happen? But I was still a kid, and so it did happen. Why had she always been so patient with me anyway? I'm just a man carrying the poison of testosterone and blah 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 blah. She said I was on drugs if I really believed in Dogman, but it seemed more likely to her that this was me making some sort of ploy to try to get money out of her. She never explained the accusation, but she didn't need to. She was on a roll, and she was on a performance high. I tried to make things feel more normal. I asked when I was getting out, and when I could go home. Well, after you made me feel unsafe with all your violent words about abandoning the family to live off-grid and use your white privilege to mock people of poverty by pretending you're one of them, I can't imagine you had any illusions about it rejoining the family proper. Please take your male rage elsewhere. So that's not an exact quote, but basically she wasn't letting me back home. I apologized, which would have worked in the past. This time, she took it as an admission of guilt and acted like she no longer felt any guilt herself about banning me from the family home, even though I was her eldest child. Mother wasn't always like that, but this was 2020, and she had no option but to stop thinking and to parrot whatever she was told to. Some of us can think and make our own decisions, it's true, but there are a lot fewer people like us, and a lot more people like my mother. It's not really our place to judge them. They can't help doing what they're told to do. And if you're missing someone who is now programmed to dislike you, take comfort in the awareness that this was not really a person who was ever there with you in a full sense mentally. You were either an obligation or a status symbol to them, sometimes interchangeably, but you were never going to be a real person to a person who isn't fully real. Most humans receive their ideas by plugging into the hive mind. Some of us are born with that connection broken, though, and so we have to find out things on our own and make new decisions in every moment. We aren't plugged into a pre-existing philosophy that makes all our decisions for us. That doesn't make us better than anyone else, though. Yes, it does mean we're more likely to discover new things that might help humanity, but it also makes us more likely to get hung up and strung up and taken out of commission because our discoveries are so scary to the villagers. Mother paid for my hospitalization, then gave me a check with a lump sum, writing a note on the check reading, "In return for going away." I thought about appealing to her humanity, but then I remembered who I was talking about. Her friends would actually applaud her cutting me out of the will, what with my toxic maleness and all that. She probably gets toasted as a hero for it. That's alright though. My mother doesn't know it, but I've been living in an old shack on the back of her land. It's cold, and the hunting is not great, especially in the winter. It's got great Wi-Fi though, and so I am researching the Dogman. In the spring, I'm going to start swimming in that deep swimming hole again. Every day I'm going to swim in there. All spring, all summer, however long it takes, till they come back. I want to return to the Dogman pack. I may have been treated like a dog and fed scraps, but I felt more respected than I ever could feel among my mother's family. That's the lesson I learned when I was captive of the Dogman clan. No matter who, what, where, why, or when-o, today's EP's Nepomuceno. Please join us in thanking Edwin Nepomuceno or Nepomuceno, I'm sorry dude, I keep forgetting, for making this episode possible. He gets to see our secret uncensored stories, and there are over 25 hours of archived secret Dogman stories too. Here to explain how you can see them all as well is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Thank. Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.